Have you ever worked for someone who was in charge, but nobody really wanted to follow them? Sure, maybe they had the title, maybe they had the corner office, maybe everyone had to obey them, but no one trusted them. No one volunteered to help them. And the second they left the room, everyone was happy. Now, think about the opposite kind of leader. The one people would follow even if the org chart said they didn't have to. The one whose team stays calm when things go sideways. The one people trust enough to speak to honestly. That difference has very little to do with title. It has everything to do with leadership. And it's hard to find a better example of that than Captain Jean-Luc Picard. In Season 7, Episode 12 of Star Trek: The Next Generation, the Pegasus, Picard is put in an impossible position. He's ordered to help Admiral Pressman recover a long-lost Federation starship. But the deeper they dig into the mission, the more it becomes clear that Pressman isn't telling the whole truth. And at the same time, the Romulans are closing in fast. Time is running out. The pressure keeps mounting. And throughout all of it, Picard quietly demonstrates why people willingly follow him. Check this out. The first thing that stood out to me was right at the beginning of the episode. When Admiral Pressman tells Picard about the mission, Picard doesn't start formulating a plan right away. Instead, he asks one simple question. What are our orders? What are our orders? What? That's a weird sentence. Try saying that. What are our orders? It's like a mouth exercise or something. Okay, I love that question because it reminds us that great leaders also know how to follow. Some leaders think that confidence just means independence, and they act like every instruction is an optional suggestion. Every policy is beneath them. Every supervisor is just someone to work around. And Picard doesn't do that. He understands something that's easy to forget. Healthy organizations require healthy authority. And respecting that chain of command, it doesn't make you weak. It teaches your team how healthy authority should function. Now, that is not the same thing as blind obedience. We'll come back to that later because Picard absolutely knows when to push back. But first, he chooses to understand his role in the plan. And that is mature leadership. As the episode unfolds, the Enterprise encounters a Romulan warbird, and the Romulans appear out of nowhere, and Picard says, "Your unannounced appearance might have unfortunate consequences." What a fantastic line. Basically, he's saying, yo, we almost blew you guys up, but he's saying it diplomatically. And then when the Romulans ask what the Enterprise is doing there, Picard just responds in kind. I might ask you the same question. The Romulans claim they're studying gaseous anomalies, and Picard says, how interesting. So are we? And then he suggests they work together. Think about what's happening here. He's lowering the temperature without giving away any strategic information. He's protecting his crew without provoking a fight. Great leaders understand that not every disagreement needs to become this battle. Sometimes the goal isn't winning the conversation, it's accomplishing the mission. But probably my favorite part in this episode comes when Picard is talking with Admiral Pressman about Commander Riker. Pressman asks Picard why he selected Riker as his first officer. And Picard says something that is really remarkable. He says that all the candidates looked equally qualified on paper, but one thing stood out about Riker. He had disobeyed a direct order, and Pressman is just totally shocked. He says, you want someone who disobeyed orders? And Picard says, I wanted someone who would stand up to me, someone more concerned with the safety of the ship and accomplishing the mission than with how it might look on his record. To me, that's one of the marks of a good officer. That is extraordinary leadership. Because insecure leaders surround themselves with yes men, people who will just agree with whatever they say. Healthy leaders surround themselves with people who will tell them the truth. Every organization drifts toward groupthink. We all like to hear our own ideas validated. We all enjoy people saying, hey, what a great idea. But that is where bad ideas thrive. And Picard intentionally built the opposite culture. He wanted someone willing to challenge him, not because disagreement feels good, it doesn't, but because disagreement protects the mission. Imagine interviewing someone and saying, I hope you'll tell me when I'm wrong. How many leaders actually mean that? Picard did. And because he spent years building that culture, look at how decisions get made aboard the Enterprise. At one point, the crew is faced with two bad decisions: destroy the Pegasus or race to recover it before the Romulans. And Picard comes up with a third option. And I love that because there usually is a third option. We just tend to stop looking after option number 2. But instead of immediately settling on this third option, Picard turns to his crew. First, he looks to Data to see, would this be possible? Then to LaForge, then back to Data, one expert building on another. And LaForge proposes using naturally occurring radiation to hide the Pegasus from the Romulan sensors. And then Data confirms that, yeah, that might work. Problem solved with the third option and collaboration. You see, Picard wasn't the smartest engineer in the room, and he didn't have to be, because leadership is not about having all the answers. Leadership is about creating an environment where the best answers can emerge. Everyone contributes their expertise. The leader's job is to create that environment where ideas are actually shared. And that's exactly what Picard is doing here. That is what he has built. But Picard isn't a perfect leader. At one point in this episode, he confronts Riker about the Pegasus mission. And instead of asking curious questions, he starts asking why. Why was the report buried? Why didn't you tell me? Why? And his voice gets louder. Riker gets defensive. And eventually, Riker just says, I'm under orders not to discuss it, sir. Do you notice that shift? The conversation, it stopped being collaborative and now it's just transactional, almost adversarial. Why questions often sound like accusations, and they ask people to justify themselves, to defend themselves. Earlier in the episode, Picard was asking questions like, how long? How can we? What options do we have? Those how and what questions, they invite thinking. The why questions Picard is asking here invite defense. And it's a reminder that how we communicate often shapes our outcomes. But even here, Picard recovers his leadership. He looks Riker in the eye and he says that he's trusting Riker. But if that trust has been misplaced, I'll have to reconsider the command structure aboard the Enterprise. And I love this because he's setting clear consequences. He's not making threats. And there's a big difference. Threats are vague. Things like, hey, we're gonna have problems here. This won't end well. We're gonna have a different kind of conversation. Those are all threats and create more uncertainty than clarity. Consequences are specific. If this happens, here's what I'll do. Healthy leaders don't intimidate. They create clarity. And the same thing happens later when Pressman orders the Enterprise deeper into this asteroid. Picard believes that the mission is becoming too dangerous. And so he calmly sets a boundary. If the passage narrows below 50 meters, I'm going to abort the mission. And Picard is clear about the consequences for himself. Pressman can charge him with insubordination if necessary. That's not rebellion. That's leadership. Boundaries define what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, even when the consequences fall on you. Which brings us to the moment that everything has been building toward in this episode. Pressman eventually tries to seize control of the Enterprise. He outranks Picard. On paper, everyone should obey him, right? But they don't. Why? Because rank can command compliance, but it cannot command trust. Trust is earned long before the crisis starts. It's earned in hundreds of conversations, hundreds of decisions, hundreds of small moments where people learn whether you will listen, whether you will protect them, whether you will tell the truth, whether you will admit when you're wrong, whether you value their expertise. And by the time Pressman tries to assert his authority, it's too late. The crew already has decided who their leader is. And that is one of the biggest leadership lessons in this entire episode. You don't don't build trust during the crisis. The crisis just reveals whether you've been building trust all along. One final thing about Picard's leadership is how balanced it is. He respects authority, but he's not afraid to challenge it. He welcomes disagreement, but he still knows when to make the final decision. He empowers his team, but he also holds them accountable. When Riker finally tells the truth, Picard doesn't shield him from the consequences. He tells him to be honest and face the consequences. That is integrity. Leadership isn't about avoiding difficult consequences. Leadership is having the courage to face them. So where do I rank Picard? It shouldn't be a surprise to you that for me, Picard reaches the highest level. I would work for him. Not because he's always right, he's not, but because he makes disagreement safe. He trusts his experts. He asks questions before making decisions. He balances authority with humility. And when you put all of those things together, you get the environment for a great team. People think proactively. They challenge assumptions. They solve problems together. They grow. And that is the kind of team every leader wants. But teams like that don't happen by accident. They happen because a leader creates the conditions where thinking is safe. And that is a lesson worth carrying into every meeting, every difficult conversation, every decision you make. Because your job as a leader is not to create followers. It is to create an environment where your team can perform at their best. And when your people feel safe enough to think, safe enough to disagree, safe enough to tell you the truth, you'll become the kind of leader people follow because they want to, not because they have to. Coming up, we are heading to yet another Enterprise. Captain Catherine Janeway is under the microscope. She is one of the most respected captains in Star Trek, but she also made some of the most controversial leadership decisions in the entire franchise. So was she an exceptional leader, or did her crew simply have no other choice but to follow her? We'll find out. And if there's a TV or movie character you'd like me to analyze, just let me know down in the comments. Until next time, take care.